On the morning of March 12, 1983, a man named Viktor Andrei Volkov sat in a windowless room beneath the KGB headquarters in Moscow, reading a file that would destroy everything he believed in. The folder was thin, just 17 pages, but the name typed on the cover page made his hand shake for the first time in 23 years of service. It was his wife's name. And beside it, in red ink, a single word: liquidation. He had always followed orders. Every single one. Without hesitation, without question, without mercy. He had killed for the state. He had lied for the revolution. He had watched men beg and done nothing because the party demanded silence. Viktor Andrei Volkov was what Moscow called a ghost operator, a man so loyal, so invisible, so efficient that his own existence was classified. But that morning, staring at those 17 pages, something inside him cracked. Not his training, not his discipline. Something deeper. Something the KGB hadn't planned for. The file said his wife, Elena Volkov, had been in contact with a British diplomat in Prague. It said she had passed information. It said she was a traitor. It said she would be eliminated within 72 hours. Viktor knew every word was a lie. But he also knew that truth didn't matter anymore. In the Soviet Union of 1983, suspicion was guilt, and guilt was death. For 23 years, Viktor had been the instrument of that logic. Now he was about to become its enemy. The world Viktor Volkov knew was built on fear, control, and an unspoken understanding. No one was above the system. Not generals, not scientists, not the loyal, especially not the loyal. Because loyalty in the Soviet intelligence apparatus was never assumed, it was tested, again and again, until the test itself became the punishment. The KGB didn't trust anyone. It couldn't afford to, and so it watched everyone, even its own, especially its own. Viktor had been recruited in 1960, fresh out of university. His degree in engineering meaningless the moment a man in a gray coat sat across from him in a cafe near Gorky Park and asked a single question: "Do you love your country?" Viktor had said yes. He didn't know, then, that saying yes meant giving up everything else: his privacy, his conscience, his right to doubt. He didn't know that from that day forward his life would be measured not in years or achievements, but in operations completed and secrets buried. They trained him in a facility outside Minsk. No name, no address. Just walls and silence and instructors who never smiled. They taught him how to kill without leaving evidence, how to extract information without leaving marks, how to disappear into a crowd, into a language, into a life that wasn't his. They taught him that emotion was weakness, that attachment was vulnerability, that the state was the only family that mattered. And Viktor learned. God, how he learned. By 1965, he was operating in East Berlin, tracking dissidents, turning informants, feeding intelligence back to Moscow. By 1970, he was in Prague, Budapest, Warsaw, wherever the cracks in the Iron Curtain needed to be sealed. He was good at his work. So good that his superiors began to forget he was human. So good that he began to forget it himself. But then, in 1976, during a mission in Leningrad, he met Elena. She wasn't part of the operation. She wasn't an asset, a target, or a contact. She was a librarian, a woman who cataloged old books in a building that smelled like dust and rain. Viktor had gone there to meet an informant, but the informant never showed. So he waited, and while he waited, she spoke to him. Just small talk. About the weather. About a book she was reading. About nothing. It was the first conversation Viktor had in years that wasn't code. He married her 8 months later. The KGB approved it. They always did background checks, always vetted the spouses of operatives, but they approved it. Elena was clean, ordinary, safe. She worked, came home, read books, and asked no questions. She was exactly the kind of wife a ghost operator was supposed to have. Invisible. Viktor loved her. He never told her what he did. She never asked. That was the arrangement. That was survival. For 7 years it worked. But on the morning of March 12, 1983, that arrangement shattered. The file on his desk claimed Alina had been meeting with a man named Jonathan Cross, a low-level cultural attaché at the British Embassy in Prague. According to the report, they had been seen together 3 times in the past 2 months. Once at a cafe, once near a museum, once in a park. The photographs were grainy but unmistakable. Alina's face half hidden by a scarf. Cross beside her, leaning in close. The report concluded with clinical efficiency. Subject exhibits behavioral indicators consistent with ideological subversion. Recommend immediate termination to prevent intelligence compromise. Victor read it twice. Then a 3rd time. He knew the language. He had written reports like this himself. He knew what immediate termination meant. It didn't mean arrest. It didn't mean interrogation. It meant a phone call to a man with no name, who would send another man with no face, who would walk up to Alina on a street corner or in a stairwell or in their own apartment and put a bullet in the back of her head. Quietly, professionally, without ceremony. And it would happen in 72 hours. Victor sat very still. The room around him was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He could hear his own breathing. He could feel the weight of the file in his hands. And for the first time in 23 years, he didn't know what to do. He had killed people on less evidence than this. He had signed off on executions based on a single photograph, a single conversation, a single suspicion. He had never questioned it. Because questioning meant doubt, and doubt meant disloyalty. And disloyalty meant you became the next name in the next file. But this was Alina. He closed the folder and placed it carefully on the desk. Then he stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked out of the room. His movements were calm, controlled, exactly as they had always been. But inside, something had already shifted. Something irreversible. Viktor Andrei Volkov had just made a decision that would put him on the wrong side of the most dangerous intelligence agency in the world. He was going to save his wife. And he was going to burn everything else to the ground. The plan began in his mind before he even left the building. Victor had spent 2 decades studying how the KGB operated, how it tracked threats, how it eliminated problems. He knew the procedures, the protocols, the weak points. He knew that once a liquidation order was signed, it moved through a specific chain approval from Directorate S, logistics coordinated through Department 8. Execution carried out by a specialist from Line F. The timeline was always the same. 72 hours from file approval to body disposal. He had 72 hours to make Alina disappear. Not just from Moscow, from the entire Soviet system. From every record, every file, every surveillance network that had been watching her since the day she was born. He had to erase her so completely that when the executioner came looking, there would be nothing to find. It was impossible. But Victor had done impossible things before. He left KGB headquarters at 1400 hours, exactly as scheduled. He took the metro to Arbatskaya, changed lines twice, then walked 4 blocks to a building he hadn't visited in 6 years. It looked like an ordinary apartment complex, gray and crumbling like every other structure in Moscow. But the 3rd-floor unit belonged to a man named Grigory Petrov, a documents forger who had once worked for the KGB and now worked for anyone who could pay. Victor knocked 3 times. The door opened a crack. Grigory's face appeared, older and thinner than Victor remembered. "I need 2 sets of papers," Victor said. "Clean. Dated back 5 years. Hungarian passports. 1 male, 1 female." Grigory stared at him. "You're KGB." "I was. You still are." "Not after today." Grigory opened the door wider. "This will cost you. I know. And if you're lying, I'm not." Grigory studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 48 hours. I need them in 24. Impossible. Victor reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was more money than Grigory would see in a year. 24 hours, Victor said again. Grigory took the envelope. Victor left the building and walked north toward the river. The sky was gray and low. the kind of sky that made Moscow feel like a prison even when you were outside. He kept his pace steady, his face blank. He knew there were cameras. He knew there were watchers. He knew that somewhere in some basement office, his movements were being logged, analyzed, cross-referenced. But he also knew that for now, he was still just another operative doing another job. He had 24 hours before that changed. That night, Victor went home. Alina was in the kitchen making tea. She looked up when he entered, smiled, and asked about his day. He told her it was fine. Routine. Nothing unusual. She believed him. She always did. They ate dinner in silence. Victor watched her across the table, the way she moved, the way she looked at him without fear, without suspicion. She trusted him. She had no idea that her name was in a file somewhere, marked for death. She had no idea that her husband had just committed treason to keep her alive. After dinner, she went to read. Victor sat in the small living room, pretending to look at a newspaper, but his mind was racing through scenarios, contingencies, failures. He calculated distances, borders, checkpoints. He thought about who he could trust and realized the answer was no one. He thought about what would happen if he failed and realized the answer was too terrible to consider. At midnight, Elena came to bed. Victor lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to warn her, prepare her, beg her forgiveness for pulling her into this nightmare. But he couldn't. Not yet. Because if she knew, she would panic, and panic would get them both killed. So he said nothing. And in the silence, he made a promise. Whatever it took, whatever he had to destroy, he would get her out. The next morning, Victor woke early. Alina was still asleep. He dressed quietly, left the apartment, and took the metro to a different part of the city, a neighborhood near the factories where the streets smelled like oil and smoke. He walked into a garage that looked abandoned, but wasn't. Inside, a man named Dmitri was waiting. Dmitri had been a KGB logistics officer until he stole a shipment of military radios and sold them on the black market. The KGB never caught him. Victor had caught him. But instead of reporting it, Victor had kept the information. A favor owed. A card to play. Now, he was playing it. "I need a car," Victor said. "Something that won't be traced. And I need it today." Dmitri looked at him, then at the envelope Victor placed on the workbench. He opened it. Inside was the rest of Victor's savings. "Where are you going?" Dmitri asked. "Somewhere the state can't follow." Dmitri laughed. "There's no such place." "There will be." Dmitri handed him a set of keys. "Black Lada. Parked 2 blocks east. Plates are clean. Engine solid. Don't bring it back." Victor took the keys. By noon, he had the car. By 1300 hours, he had picked up the forged documents from Grigory. By 1400 hours, he was back at KGB headquarters, sitting at his desk as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He accessed the internal database, using his clearance to pull Elena's file. He read every page, every note, every surveillance report. And then, carefully, methodically, he began to alter it. He changed dates. He deleted photographs. He rewrote entries to make her look less suspicious, less interesting, less worth the effort. It wasn't enough to stop the liquidation. The order had already been signed, but it might buy him time. At 1600 hours, his supervisor called him into an office. "You've been assigned a new operation," the man said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Immediate deployment. Budapest. Target is a Hungarian diplomat suspected of passing information to the Americans. You leave tonight." Victor opened the folder. He scanned the details. And then he understood. They were sending him away. They knew. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to want him out of Moscow while they dealt with Alina. Enough to separate them so he couldn't interfere. Enough to make sure that when his wife disappeared, he would be hundreds of kilometers away, with an alibi and no way to stop it. Victor closed the folder. "Understood," he said. The supervisor nodded. "Your flight is at 2100 hours." Victor left the office. He walked to the bathroom, locked himself in a stall, and stood there for 5 full minutes, breathing slowly, forcing his mind to stay calm. They were moving faster than he expected. They were smarter than he hoped. But they had made one mistake. They assumed he would follow orders. At 1800 hours, Victor left KGB headquarters for the last time. He didn't take anything with him. No files, no weapons, no evidence. Just the clothes on his back and the knowledge that from this moment forward he was a dead man. He went home. Elena was there, folding laundry. She looked up, surprised. "You're home early." "We need to leave," Victor said. She blinked. "What?" "Right now. Don't ask questions, just pack a bag. One bag. Clothes, documents, nothing else." Her face went pale. "Victor, what's happening? I'll explain in the car. But we need to go. Now." She stared at him. And in that moment she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. She didn't argue. She went to the bedroom, pulled a suitcase from under the bed, and started packing. Victor went to the kitchen. He opened a drawer, pulled out a map of Eastern Europe, and spread it on the table. He traced routes with his finger, calculating distances, checkpoints, borders. Hungary was closest, but too obvious. Czechoslovakia was monitored too heavily. Poland was possible. Austria was a dream. He folded the map and put it in his jacket. 10 minutes later, Elena appeared with a suitcase. Her hands were shaking. "Are we in danger?" she asked. "Yes. Because of you? Because of me?" She nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for details. She just picked up the suitcase and said, "Then let's go." They left the apartment at 1845 hours. Victor locked the door behind them, knowing he would never return. They walked to the car, 2 blocks away, moving quickly but not running. Running attracted attention. Victor opened the trunk, put the suitcase inside, then opened the passenger door for Elena. She got in. Victor slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled into traffic. Moscow disappeared behind them. And ahead, somewhere in the growing darkness, was a border they might not cross. A future they might not reach, and a system that would never stop hunting them. But Viktor Andrei Volkov had made his choice, and there was no going back. They drove through the night, headlights cutting through fog that rolled across the empty roads like smoke from a dying fire. Victor kept his speed steady, just below the limit, his eyes moving between the road and the rearview mirror. Elena sat beside him, silent, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't asked where they were going. She hadn't asked why. She understood, on some level that didn't require words, that questions were dangerous now. That knowledge was a weight neither of them could afford to carry. The radio played low, some propaganda broadcast about grain production in the Ukraine, and Victor let it run because silence would have been worse. Silence would have forced them to think. And thinking, right now, meant confronting the fact that they were driving toward an ardor they might not cross. Running from a government that owned every road, every checkpoint, every shadow between here and freedom. At 2200 hours, they passed a militia checkpoint outside Tula. Victor slowed, rolled down his window, and handed over his internal passport. The guard was young, bored, barely awake. He glanced at the document, glanced at Victor, then waved them through without a word. Elena exhaled. Victor didn't, because he knew that somewhere, in some operations center beneath Moscow, his name had already been flagged. His absence from the flight to Budapest had been noted. His apartment had been checked. And right now, someone was making a phone call, issuing orders. Activating protocols designed specifically for situations like this. They had maybe 6 hours before every checkpoint in the Soviet Union had his face. He pushed the accelerator down. By midnight, they were deep into the countryside, the land flat and dark and endless. Small villages appeared and disappeared like ghost clusters of wooden houses with no lights, no movement, no sign that anyone lived there at all. This was the Russia most people never saw, the Russia that existed between the propaganda posters and the official reports. A place where life was slow and hard and quiet, where people survived by keeping their heads down and their mouths shut. Victor had always despised it. The poverty, the resignation, the way people accepted their suffering as if it were weather, something beyond their control. But now, Driving through it, he felt something close to envy. These people had nothing, but they also had no files, no surveillance, no one watching their every move, waiting for them to slip. They were invisible in a way Victor had never been. At 0200 hours, Victor pulled off the main road onto a dirt path that led into a forest. He drove until the trees were thick enough to hide the car, then stopped and killed the engine. Alina looked at him. "Where are we?" 50 kilometers south of Oriel, Victor said. "We'll rest here for a few hours. At dawn, we keep moving." "Where are we going?" Victor paused. He had been avoiding this question because he didn't have a good answer. The borders were locked. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, all of them monitored. All of them impossible to cross without papers that would pass inspection. The forged Hungarian passports Grigori had made were good, but not perfect. And if they were stopped at a real checkpoint, with real scrutiny, the forgery would be discovered in minutes. But there was one place the KGB didn't watch as closely. One place where the border was long and poorly guarded, where the terrain was rough enough to hide in, where desperation might, just might, be enough. "Romania," Victor said. Alina stared at him. "That's 1,000 kilometers. 940. Victor, it's the only option. The Romanians are allied with Moscow, officially. But Ceausescu doesn't trust the Soviets. He's been building his own intelligence network, separate from the KGB. If we can get across the border, we might be able to disappear before Moscow even knows to look for us there. And if we can't?" Victor didn't answer. Alina closed her eyes. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. "Why did they want to kill me?" Victor had known this question was coming. He had been dreading it. "They think you passed information to a British diplomat," he said. "What? In Prague? 2 months ago?" "They have photographs." "I've never been to Prague." "I know." "Then how—" "Someone fabricated the evidence." Elena's face went pale. "Who?" "I don't know. Why?" "To get to me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Victor had spent 23 years making enemies. He had interrogated people, turned them into informants, destroyed their lives in the name of the state. And some of those people may be a target he had missed, maybe an informant who had been caught, maybe even another operative who wanted his position, had found a way to strike back. Not at him directly, that would have been too obvious, but at his wife. At the one thing Victor cared about more than the mission. It was elegant, in a way. Brutal, efficient, exactly the kind of operation Victor himself would have designed. Alina was shaking. Not from fear, from anger. "So I'm going to die because of something you did. You're not going to die. You don't know that. I do." "How?" Victor looked at her. "Because I'm not going to let it happen." She held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "You should have let me go." "No. You could have stayed. You could have kept your life, your position, everything. I don't care about any of that. You're lying. I'm not." Alina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "For 23 years you've cared about nothing but the work. Don't pretend this is about me. This is about your pride. You can't stand the idea that someone used you, that someone made you look weak." Victor said nothing, because part of what she said was true. Part of him was angry, furious, that someone had outmaneuvered him, that someone had found his weakness and exploited it. But that wasn't why he had taken the file. That wasn't why he had destroyed his career, his life, everything he had built. He had done it because when he saw her name in that folder, when he read the word liquidation beside it, something inside him had broken. Not his training, not his discipline. Something older, something human. He had done it because he loved her. And love, in the world Victor had lived in, was the most dangerous thing of all. They slept in the car, or tried to. Alina dozed fitfully, her head against the window. Victor stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the forest wind in the branches, the distant call of an owl, the creak of wood settling in the cold. Every sound made him tense. Every shadow made him reach for the gun he had taken from his apartment, a Makarov pistol that felt heavier now than it ever had before. At 0530, the sky began to lighten. Victor started the engine and pulled back onto the road. They drove south through villages that were waking up, through fields where farmers were already working, through a landscape that looked the same no matter how far they went. Flat, gray, empty. At 0800 hours, they passed a convoy of military trucks heading north. Victor kept his eyes forward, his hands steady on the wheel. Elena didn't move. The trucks rumbled past, close enough that Victor could see the faces of the soldiers in the back, young, tired, staring at nothing. When the convoy was gone, Elena spoke. "They're looking for us." "Not yet," Victor said. "But they will be soon. How long do we have?" "Until someone checks the database and sees what I did to your file. Maybe 12 hours. Maybe less. And then? Then every checkpoint, every militia station, every KGB field office between here and the Black Sea gets our descriptions. So we have to cross the border before that happens." "Yes." Elena looked out the window. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Victor didn't answer because the truth was he didn't know. The distance was too far. The time was too short. The odds were impossible. But he kept driving because the alternative was surrender. And surrender meant death. At 1000 hours, they stopped at a small town to refuel. Victor paid in cash, avoided eye contact with the attendant, and got back on the road as quickly as possible. Elena bought bread and cheese from a shop, and they ate in the car, still moving, the kilometers disappearing behind them one by one. By noon, they were in the Varanish region, the land turning hilly, the roads narrower. Victor took smaller routes now, avoiding the main highways where checkpoints were more common. It slowed them down, but it also made them harder to track. At 1400 hours, the radio crackled and went silent. Victor frowned, adjusted the dial, but found nothing. Just static. He switched it off. "What does that mean?" Elena asked. "It means they've started jamming civilian broadcasts," Victor said. "It means they're preparing for something. For us? Maybe." Elena looked at him. "You really think we're that important?" "I think the KGB doesn't like losing control," Victor said. "And right now, we represent a very public loss of control." They drove in silence for another hour. Then, as they crested a hill, Victor saw something that made his chest tighten. A checkpoint. It was small, just 2 militia officers and a wooden barrier across the road, but it was enough. Victor slowed, his mind racing through options. He could turn around, but that would draw attention. He could try to talk his way through, but his credentials were KGB, and using them now would send up a flare that Moscow would see immediately. Or he could run the checkpoint. It was a stupid idea. Suicidal, even. But it might be the only idea he had left. He glanced at Elena. "Get down." "What?" "Get down, now." She slid lower in her seat, her face pale. Victor approached the checkpoint slowly, his hands visible on the wheel. One of the officers stepped forward, hand raised. Victor stopped. Rolled down the window. "Papers," the officer said. Victor handed over his internal passport. The officer looked at it, looked at Victor, then glanced at his partner. Something passed between them. A look, a signal. Victor couldn't tell, but he felt it. The shift, the danger. "Step out of the car," the officer said. Victor's hand moved to the Makarov under his jacket. "Sir," the officer said again, louder now. "Step out of the car." Victor opened the door, slowly. His fingers brushed the grip of the gun. He could feel his heart pounding, could feel the weight of the next 10 seconds pressing down on him. If he pulled the gun, he would have to shoot both officers. If he shot both officers, he would have to abandon the car and run. If he ran, Elena would be caught. There was no good option, but there never was. The officer stepped closer. "You match a description we received an hour ago," he said. "A man traveling south with a woman, possibly armed. Possibly dangerous." Victor said nothing. The officer reached for his radio, and Victor made his choice. He pulled the Makarov, fired twice, 2 quick shots, center mass, both officers down before they could react. The sound was deafening in the silence of the countryside. Victor grabbed the officer's radio, smashed it against the ground, then ran back to the car. "Drive!" he shouted at Elena. She stared at him, frozen. "Drive!" She scrambled into the driver's seat. Victor jumped in beside her and she slammed the accelerator down. The car lurched forward, smashing through the wooden barrier, and roared down the road. Victor looked back. The two officers lay motionless in the dirt. He had just killed 2 men. Not enemies, not threats, just 2 militia officers doing their job. Elena's hands were shaking on the wheel. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, Victor, what did you do?" "What I had to. You killed them. They would have called it in. We'd be dead in an hour. We're dead anyway, not yet." Elena's eyes were wide, her breathing fast and shallow. She looked like she was about to panic. Victor reached over, put his hand on hers. "Keep driving," he said. "Just keep driving." She nodded, swallowed, focused on the road. They drove for another 30 minutes in silence. Then Victor told her to pull over. She did. He got out, walked to the side of the road, and vomited. When he came back, Elena was crying. Victor sat beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He had crossed a line he could never uncross. He had killed 2 men who were not his enemies, who were just following orders, who had families waiting for them somewhere. He had done it to save Elena, but that didn't make it right. It just made it necessary. They switched seats. Victor drove. Elena stared out the window, her face blank. At 1700 hours, they crossed into the Rostov region. The land was flatter here, the air warmer. Victor could smell the sea, faint and distant. They were getting closer to the border, but closer also meant more patrols, more checkpoints, more eyes. At 1800 hours, Victor pulled off the road into an abandoned farm. The buildings were half collapsed, the fields overgrown. No one had lived here in years. He parked the car behind a barn, out of sight. "We'll wait here until dark," he said. "Then we move on foot." "On foot?" Elena's voice was hoarse. "Victor, the border is still 200 kilometers away. We can't use the car anymore. Every militia station in the region knows what we're driving. If we stay on the roads, we're dead. And if we go on foot, we're dead slower." Victor looked at her. "Do you want to give up?" "I want to stop running. That's the same thing." Elena closed her eyes. "I'm so tired, Victor." "I know. I don't think I can do this." "You can." "How do you know?" "Because you're still here." She opened her eyes and looked at him. And for the first time since they left Moscow, Victor saw something other than fear in her face. He saw anger. Real, burning anger. "I hate you," she said. Victor nodded. "I know. You destroyed my life. I know. And you're going to get us both killed. Maybe. Then why are we still running?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I'd rather die trying than watch them take you." Elena stared at him. Then she turned away. They sat in the car as the sun set, the sky turning red and gold and finally dark. Victor checked the gun, counted the bullets. 8 rounds left. Not enough, but it would have to be. At 2100 hours, they left the car and started walking. Victor carried the gun in a small bag with the forged documents. Elena carried nothing. They moved through fields, staying low, avoiding roads, using the stars to navigate south. The night was cold and clear. Victor could hear dogs barking in the distance, could see lights from farmhouses scattered across the hills. Every light was a threat. Every sound was a warning. They walked for 4 hours. Elena stumbled twice, exhausted, but kept going. Victor didn't speak. He just walked, one foot in front of the other, his eyes scanning the darkness. At 0100 hours, they reached a river. It was narrow but fast, the water black and cold. Victor waded in first, testing the depth. It came up to his waist. He reached back for Elena. She took his hand. They crossed together, the current pulling at their legs, the cold stealing their breath. When they reached the other side, they collapsed on the bank, shivering, soaked. Victor looked up at the sky. Somewhere above them, satellites were watching. Somewhere behind them, men with radios and guns were closing in. Somewhere ahead, the border waited. a line on a map that meant everything and nothing at all. He had no idea if they would make it, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to stop. Not for the state, not for the KGB, not for anything. Because for the first time in 23 years, Viktor Andrei Volkov was fighting for something that mattered. He was fighting for love. And love, he was learning, was worth dying for.